One and go.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's event celebrating the publication of Locating Sol LeWitt, edited by David Areford. This evening, we're going to be joined by three of his contributors, Anna Lovatt, Veronica Roberts, and Kirsten Swenson. This book has 9 chapters, which each explore different facets of LeWitt's practice. 2 of them are devoted to LeWitt's wall drawings, and the other cover many different media that he worked in. We're so happy to be hosting this event and launching this book this evening. The gallery has a long history of working with Sol LeWitt. As is mentioned in the book, his first wall drawing was executed at Paula Cooper's inaugural exhibition in 1968. I was particularly struck in reading the book about the attention it gave to projects that were abandoned, altered, or unfinished. For an artist known for his rigor, precision, and his rule-like sentences on conceptual art that have been so influential to other artists, this focus in particular was welcome, heartwarming, and at times amusing. I was reminded of a work that I encountered early on working at the gallery, which is titled Mistake Drawing. It's the beginning of one of Sol LeWitt's drawing series, in which diagonal lines proceed from the top left corner to the lower right, and then in a mirror image on the other side. But this image is different from others, which LeWitt used to create wall drawings, and also in the Xerox book for Seth Siegler, because there's a triangle that's missing a section. In the bottom right-hand corner. And it's because he realized at some point as he was working on it that he'd neglected to follow his own rule. And I was just shocked that this drawing was allowed to circulate. It had been exhibited multiple times, and couldn't quite wrap my head around it. But in reading this book, I completely understood why, because it is part of the process. The error is part of the process, and the failures are necessary stopping points on this journey to an artistic ideal, and are certainly worthy, perhaps even equally so, of the consideration of our guests this evening. So I will invite you to welcome them. With me will be joined by David Areford, the editor of this volume, who is an associate professor of art history at the University of Massachusetts. This is his second book on LeWitt. The first was Strict Beauty, Sol LeWitt Prints, published in 2020. Until he encountered the work of Sol LeWitt, he was a specialist in 15th century European printmaking and devotional art, and still is, and has published many books on the topic. Anna Lovatt is one of our 3 contributors. She is an associate professor of art history at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and in the spring of 2020, she'll be a research fellow at the Menil Drawing Institute in Houston. Lovatt is the author of Drawing Degree Zero, The Line from Minimal to Conceptual Art, and Michelle Stewart, Drawn from Nature. Veronica Roberts is a curator of modern and contemporary art at the Blanton Museum of Art at the University of Texas at Austin. She is the editor and co-author of Converging Lines, Eva Hess and Sol LeWitt. Last year, she contributed an essay on Sol LeWitt's rips to Sol LeWitt, not to be sold for more than $100. And that's one of 2 fascinating books that were published last year on this smaller body of work, part of LeWitt's practice. And finally, Kirsten Swenson is an associate professor of art history at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell. She's the author of Irrational Judgments, Eva Hess, Sol LeWitt, and 1960s New York, and the co-editor and co-author of Critical Landscapes, Art, Space, and Politics. So I'm so looking forward to hearing you discuss your chapters and hearing a little bit more about how they came about. So over to you, David.
All right, thank you, Daisy, very much for that introduction. And let me share my screen. Okay, all set. So again, well, I should start by saying it's a joy to be together, even if only in this virtual format, to celebrate the publishing of Locating Sol LeWitt. Thank you again to Daisy. I would also like to thank Victoria Napolson and Evan Dent, the manager of 192 Books, for organizing this virtual book launch. And a special shout out or series of shout outs to first Amy Canonico, our editor at Yale University Press. Also, a shout out to Steve Henry and Paula Cooper of the gallery, as well as Sophia and Carol LeWitt for their support of our book. In the book's introduction, I advocate for a plural LeWitt, that is, an embrace of Sol LeWitt that includes all of the mediums and modes he pursued throughout his career, along with the use of new and varied approaches and methodologies to investigate his work. The book's 9 essays explore the well-known wall drawings and structures, but also LeWitt's underappreciated or little explored photography, books, printmaking, and other works on paper, and even his unique forays into architecture, filmmaking, and sound and sculpture installation. Taking a cue from his location drawings, in which he sought to textually describe, spatially position, and visually articulate the placement of lines, points, and geometric figures, the essays aim to situate LeWitt, his conceptual practice, and his artworks in hitherto unexplored ways. So I'm happy to be joined by 3 of the contributors, and I look forward to their presentations and our group discussion. But I would like to acknowledge the other contributors as well. Erica De Benedetto, James Miller, Lindsay Avilhe, and John Tyson. I thank all of the contributors for sharing their scholarship through the venue of Locating Sol LeWitt. Of course, thank you to the audience who are linking to this live event or will be watching it in the future. For the live audience, we hope there will be time at the end to share your questions with us. So let's begin with Veronica Roberts.
Thank you, David. I'm so delighted to be here. And I also want to just mention that I imagine we have many aficionados on this call, but for those who are new to LeWitt and eager to see more, I can't say enough good things about MoMA, which is not too far from New York and in the Berkshires in North Adams, Massachusetts. If you have a chance to see many of the wall drawings and works that are discussed in this wonderful book are on view at MoMA. It's an entire building filled with wall drawings. So and it will be up for decades. So you've got some time, but don't miss it. My essay is called Front Lines, LeWitt at Work at the Modern, 1960 to 1965. And I should start by saying that I was really lucky to meet Sol LeWitt in my first job, which was as a curatorial assistant at the Whitney. And I really was only familiar with LeWitt's writings. But one of the things that I learned working on the retrospective, which was organized by Gary Garrels at the time at SF MoMA, at Travel to the Whitney, one of the things that I learned was that Sol had worked as a night watchman, which was essentially kind of a receptionist, and he worked as the book counter. He called it the book counter at the Modern. They didn't call it MoMA in those days. They called it the Modern, and that had a really pivotal impact on his work. So David, we can start with the first image, if you don't mind. And I was really interested in learning more about that, and took this opportunity to kind of focus on. For the book, focus on his 5 years that he spent as essentially a receptionist at MoMA. And the reason that this had an enormous impact, well, of course, working at a museum with a world-class collection like MoMA's would influence you and have a formative impact on a young artist who's figuring out their way in the world. But the book was really also about the friendships that he made there. And I'll talk about that in a moment. I just share this fabulous image we know exactly what day Sol started work. It was March 18th, 1960, and he remembers that day in his oral history because the night before was this very well-publicized artwork, Homage to New York, a self-constructing and self-destroying work of art was by Jean Tinguely, was performed in the MoMA sculpture garden with the fire department coming at the very end. And he remembers the debris being in the sculpture garden when he arrived for his first day of work the next day. So as I mentioned, 1960 to 1965, we can go to the next image. What I was struck by, so when Sol LeWitt started work at MoMA, as I share in the book, he was really floundering as an artist. He had destroyed most of his early work. He considered himself, I use the word flounder because that's the word he described himself at that moment. He was in his 30s. He had not yet really exhibited in New York. He was not a well-known artist. He didn't have a career. He wasn't exhibiting. He was trying to find his way. And it was really through his, while he was working as a receptionist, he met Dan Flavin for the first time, and also Dan Flavin's wife, Sonia Flavin, who worked at MoMA as well. He met Robert Ryman, who worked as a security guard and was there for almost a decade. He met Robert Mangold, who worked as in the library and also as a replacement summer guard and was there for several years. And he met Lucy Lepard, all artists, and who was who was working in the library paging books, but became such an important art critic, friend, and voice of, champion of his work, and so many others. So it was an incredible time. There was a policy at MoMA at the time to hire artists for these kinds of jobs. There was an amazing woman running the HR department. And so for all of these artists, this was their first time meeting one another. And Flavin in particular, although he was there for a very brief period, he was so chatty, he'd get fired from all of his jobs. So he had like a million day jobs. He was a security guard or a elevator operator at virtually every museum in town, but never for very long. But I think it was particularly his conversations with Dan Flavin that had a profound, lunchtime conversations, break time conversations, dinners after their shared jobs that had a real impact on Sol. And Sol talked specifically about this work, the nominal three. And I know that PowerPoint tends to sort of blow out images. So let me just share that there's one fluorescent bulb on the far left, then two, and then three. So this was named, it's called the nominal three to William of Ockham. And it was for Sol LeWitt, he talks about it being one of the first serial, not as in Cheerios cereal with an S, serial works that he encountered, or system works as he called it, that had a real impact on his thinking. And at the time, Sol LeWitt was making more modular works, and he really credits this encounter with this particular work and also his interactions with Muybridge photographs, Edward Muybridge photographs, with his leap from the modular to the serial. So if we look at the next slide, this is the kind of work that Sol goes on in 1966. This is the kind of serial work that he starts to really gain a reputation for. And I know it looks a bit like a jungle gym from this vantage point, but it is an idea-driven, it's a concept-driven work, which involves open and closed forms in all permutations. And you can see sort of the parallel. There's a system, there's a logic that Sol LeWitt as the artist then just fulfills the logic. So in the back left, you have closed or solid forms inside of solid forms. On the back right, you have solid forms on the outside and then open forms on the inside. On the bottom right, you have the solid forms on the inside, open on the outside, and then on the far left, open on the inside, open on the outside. So there's a logic. He's fulfilling and this is the kind of work that really sets him onto the path of conceptual art before he's even making the wall drawings that he's best known for. And I love that this work is in MoMA's collection where he once worked. We can keep going. I also in the essay, I trace a little bit also the impact that Sol LeWitt had on Dan Flavin. Although they only overlapped as colleagues for a short period, Sol LeWitt mentioned to me that he shared Camilla Gray's book with Dan Flavin, and actually gave it to his wife, Sonia, and she brought it home and gave it to him, and it became a really important touchstone for Flavin. He was already interested in, these works that he was interested in these, and Vladimir Tatlin in particular, and these icons. So if we look at, I have one more image, a work like this, Monument for Vladimir Tatlin, number 30. This is one of, I think, his best known series. And that interest in the Russian avant-garde really comes in part from that exchange of ideas that occurred with LeWitt. LeWitt was an avid reader, and MoMA was across the street from a library. I can't remember, Donnell, I think it was the Donnell Library, and he would often check out books and pass them along, and watch French films and recommend them to his colleagues. So you can also really trace that it was a reciprocal relationship and engagement. We can keep going. And I also address the way that this mutual regard and influence ends up manifesting itself in exhibition opportunities as well. Sol LeWitt's very first group show happened, he was kind of a late bloomer. It happened in 1964 at a short-lived gallery run by two professors called Kmar Gallery. It was a merging of their names. And this was a show that was actually curated by Dan Flavin, and he included Sol LeWitt in it. And you can see other folks like Donald Judd, Joe Baer, Frank Stella, Robert Ryman. So other folks that worked with him at MoMA, people who, and these might be really well-known, for the most part, quite well-known names now, but none of these artists would have been that well-known then. And I'll share an image. The next image is of the LeWitt work, is the sort of table piece that no longer exists. And then there's also a great, that sort of sculpture with holes in it that's small in the center on the wall, is also an early Sol LeWitt from 1964, kind of before he's fully made that leap into the serial. He's still working at MoMA at this point, so still working out his ideas. And but this was a really important first step for him. And I think it's interesting that his first wall drawing also comes at Paula Cooper Gallery, comes at the invitation of someone he met at MoMA, which is Lucy Lepard. I think do I have one more image? Yes, I think I have one or two. So what I wanted to share here, and Anna Lovatt writes so beautifully about this work in her essay. This is a wall drawing that's also near and dear to my heart. This is an installation from its exhibition at MoMA in a show called Information that was curated by Kynaston McShine. And what I love about this wall drawing is, first, it's a wall drawing in his former home of employment, and it has a really fantastic, so he's just 2 years into making the wall drawings, a little less than 2 years, and it has a fantastic title, which doubles as its instructions. And I am just going to read it because it's so wonderful, and you'll see why it interested me. The title is, or subtitle, it's wall drawing number 48, and the subtitle is, within 4 adjacent squares, each 4 by 4 feet, 4 draftsmen will be employed at $4 an hour for 4 hours a day and for 4 days to draw straight lines 4 inches long using 4 different colored pencils, 9H black, red, yellow, and blue. Each draftsman will use the same color throughout the 4-day period, working on a different square each day. And this is he's clearly delighting in the absurdity of the number 4, which he's repeating in, the 4 draftsmen, the 4 squares, the 4 hours a day, 4 days. So he's playing on these numbers. But what I love most of all is that he stipulates how much the drafters are getting paid. And think think about the fact that this is 1970. $4 an hour would actually have been a pretty good wage at that moment. It's not as bad as it sounds now. But I think the fact that he is incorporating the payment that the drafters would make is in a way a nod to his own history as a salaried hourly employee. It's not salaried, sorry, an hourly employee at the museum. So he's sort of acknowledging his own labor and making that part of the part of the logic of the work. And I will say he also adjusted that price, because this wall drawing has been exhibited many times since then, and he adjusted the price, that the amount that was paid, the wages that were paid, to I think $40 an hour, to sort of keep in line with inflation. And then my last image, thinking about labor, I wanted to share that there was sort of, I think, a rethinking of what it means to be an artist that was happening at this time, and a real move away from the kind of abstract expressionist model of conflating an artist's personality and their inner turmoils with their work, and having such I think there was a real reaction against the sort of histrionic and overly biographical interpretation of the artist, and a lot more emphasis placed on the artist as a worker, as a wage earner, a worker, someone with who worked hard, had not just the sort of genius who's tortured and making work from that. And I love this Stan Flavin painting that he made in 1960, which is the year Sol started that job at MoMA, around the same time that Dan Flavin's there. And many of these early works he made in honor of coworkers of his. So Gus Schulze was an art preparator at MoMA at the same time. And then he also made other works. There was another work made in honor of a man named Ward Jackson, who worked in the mailroom at the Guggenheim for the brief period that Dan Flavin worked there. So I think it's a beautiful acknowledgement of the kind of friendships that were formed, the kind of labor they were performing. And I just want to wrap up by saying that Sol LeWitt has said in an interview that knowing these people in his first job at the Modern and talking to them was really more of an education than he ever received in art school. So I like just thinking about the way that the day jobs can inform artistic practices as much as a graduate education. And I'm actually doing a show on artist day jobs that will open at the Blant in 2023 and will include these artists. It was a springboard for a much larger project that will include, go to the present, and that'll open in 2023. And so I'm grateful to Sol for always, he had brilliant ideas that he executed, but he also left many for the rest of us to realize. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to David and to Daisy, to everyone at Paula Cooper and 192 Books. So as the book Locating Sol LeWitt shows, LeWitt had an extraordinarily productive career and made thousands of artworks across a variety of media. This serial methodology meant that once he'd established a basic system, the structure of a work of art was generated automatically, and often one artwork led to another. In LeWitt's famous words, the idea became a machine that made the art. But in the course of my research, I became interested in a number of eccentric early wall drawings that faltered, failed, or in some cases were foiled, and were subsequently abandoned, revised, and set aside to be taken up decades later. By describing these works provocatively in terms of failure or malfunction, I do not intend to pass judgment on their quality as artworks or to dismiss them as unworthy of further analysis. On the contrary, in my essay, I locate these works in a zone of radical experimentation in which LeWitt dared to be unproductive, a kind of space resistant to the serial, very productive logic of his broader artistic practice. So my essay for the book, entitled LeWitt's Malfunctioning Machines, includes drawings made on three-dimensional objects, in the corner of a room, inside a chest of drawers, and on perforated acoustical tiles. But today I'll highlight just 3 of these works, which were all made between 1969 and 1971. And can I have the next slide, please? So I'm showing you here wall drawing number 14, and we're looking here at the drawing on the floor, which really demonstrates the elasticity of the term wall drawing in these early years. So the work consists of a 5-foot square of white paint sprayed on the floor, and it can really only be considered a drawing by virtue of its linear edges, which outline a geometric figure, a square, at the viewer's feet. It's the only wall drawing executed on the floor and the first to use paint, which was later incorporated into the wall drawings on acrylic grounds that LeWitt began in 1975. And you can see some of these here on the surrounding walls in this installation at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hertford. Wall drawing 14 gestures towards LeWitt's early career as a painter, and specifically his understanding of painting as an activity done on a flat surface. So it really has the flushness and site specificity that LeWitt admired in Quattrocento fresco painting. The white square of wall drawing 14 also brings to mind the history of the monochrome, specifically Kazimierz Malejevich's suprematist composition, which I have here in the next slide, which is in the MoMA collection. And as Veronica has discussed, it's likely that LeWitt was responding to many works in that collection following his experience working for MoMA in the early 1960s. He also spoke about his interest in suprematist painting, sparked by his encounter with Camilla Gray's book, The Great Experiment, Russian Art, which Veronica also discussed. So although Malevich associated the color white with an infinite abyss, suprematist composition really forces us to attend to its surface, to the consistency of the paint and the ragged weave of the canvas, which I hope you can just about see in this reproduction. So along with the rest of LeWitt's wall drawings, his drawing, Wall Drawing 14, extends this logic, incorporating the imperfections and idiosyncrasies of the underlying surface, and in this case, it's the floor rather than the wall, into its structure. Can we move to the next slide, please? Cast down onto the floor, the monochrome square of Wall Drawing 14 also resonates with other low-slung works of the late 1960s. We might think, of course, of Carl Andre's floor pieces or of LeWitt's friend Eva Hesse's Augment, in which 19 sheets of canvas painted with latex were stacked horizontally on the ground. Like much of Hesse's sculpture, LeWitt's Wall Drawing 14 really tests the limits of pictoriality, displacing the flat, delimited surface of painting into an unexpected context, in this case, the floor. Yet I think this latent pictoriality might have been the very reason why LeWitt abandoned works like Wall Drawing 14 after just one instance. His first wall drawings, which were installed at the Paula Cooper Gallery in 1968, were contained within squares drawn on the wall, but he subsequently said that he thought they looked too much like hanging paintings. So to integrate his wall drawings more fully with the architecture of the surrounding space, LeWitt extended them to cover the entire surface of the wall, sometimes incorporating its architectural features. And can we go back to Wall Drawing 14, please? So although Wall Drawing 14 is site-specific, the work is sectioned off from its surrounding environment in a way that LeWitt may have found too reminiscent of an autonomous art object. So we can see how he later moved to use the entire space of the wall because he didn't like this idea of hanging pictures. And perhaps that's why this white square on the floor, separated off from the surrounding space, was also ultimately abandoned. Can we move forward now to Wall Drawing 72? Great, thank you. So even more than Wall Drawing 14, a work installed at the Sadie Bronfman Centre for the Arts in Montreal in 1971 demonstrates LeWitt's early willingness to experiment with a range of different surfaces for drawing. So this is one of only 2 works that were executed on glass. And LeWitt's instructions state that black, yellow, red, and blue parallel lines should be drawn with a felt tip on a glass surface, dispersing the colours equally throughout the drawing. The lines can be either vertical or horizontal, depending on the decision made by the drafter. So Harold Pearce, who executed the drawing in Montreal, chose to rule horizontal lines in the 4 specified colours. Unfortunately, this is a black and white image, but you can just about see the horizontal lines, especially towards the middle and top of the frame of this photograph. The non-absorbent surface repelled the ink, causing the lines to disappear in parts, while pools of ink collected in others. So from outside the gallery, the drawing was barely perceptible, but when viewed from indoors, it was rendered visible by the snow-covered park across the street, which functions almost as a proxy ground for the drawing. Yet just as the snow made the black lines of LeWitt's drawing more apparent, and also the lines in other colours, the trunks and branches of the trees in the park interacted with these ruled horizontals. As we can see in this image, pedestrians and cars moved in and out of view in the ever-changing light outside. So the drawing seemed to be in a perpetual state of transformation. The world beyond the drawing disrupts the viewer's encounter with it far more than the holes, cracks, bumps, and grease marks that LeWitt had already embraced into his wall drawings, to the extent that drawing number 72 becomes almost impossible to see. Given LeWitt's pursuit of an absolute two-dimensionality, the use of clear glass also introduced a complex and distracting element of depth into this work. So like the drawing on the floor, the idea of drawing on glass was abandoned, although LeWitt did revisit it some 30 years later in 2003. Can we move to the final slide, please? My final example is not so much a failed experiment as a work that was actively foiled by the drafters in the course of its installation. So as Veronica mentioned, Wall Drawing 48 was first installed in the exhibition Information, curated by Kynaston McShine at the Museum of Modern Art in 1970. And LeWitt's instructions really emphasized the number 4, specifying that within 4 adjacent squares, 4 by 4 feet, 4 drafters would be employed at $4 an hour for 4 hours a day over the course of 4 days to draw straight lines 4 inches long using 4 different colored pencils. And each drafter was to use the same color throughout the 4-day period, but they would work on a different square each day. So in the first square, which you can see on the left-hand side here, the drafters drew 4-inch lines around 2 outstretched arms, which we can see coming in to the left and right of the square, creating the illusion of hands reaching into the drawing. In the second square, which you can see second from the left here, the lines were arranged to describe an enormous number 5, which was cast into sharp relief by the denser lines surrounding it. So these hands on the left really disrupt the abstract logic of LeWitt's practice, introducing a figurative presence into the wall drawing. They could even be seen to parody the removal of LeWitt's hand from the work, or to insist on the bodily presence of the drafters. The number 5, second from left, is even more disruptive to LeWitt's system, which, as we've both discussed, really revolved around the number 4. So LeWitt was actually traveling during the installation. He didn't see the work at MoMA, and Lippard wrote to tell him that she disliked the results of the drawing. He replied, adhering to his idea that what the work of art looks like isn't too important, that he didn't care whether the drawing was ugly or beautiful. And he added that the ugly factor was not built in, but the result of the perversity of the draftsman. In his text, Doing Wall Drawings, which was published the following summer, LeWitt wrote that the wall drawing is the artist's art as long as the plan is not violated. If it is, then the draftsman becomes the artist, and the drawing would be his work of art, but art that is a parody of the original concept. With its prominent hand stencils and the baffling number 5, wall drawing number 48 comes close to such a parody. And it seems significant that from 1974 onwards, LeWitt actually changed the instructions to specify that the 4-inch lines should be placed randomly, preventing future drafters from interpreting the instructions as they had done at MoMA. So in this short talk, I presented just 3 of the quirky, anomalous wall drawings discussed in my chapter in Locating Sol LeWitt. Working against the grain of LeWitt's better-known wall drawings, these risky experiments tend towards hybridity, invisibility, and even perhaps a kind of antagonism between the draftspeople and LeWitt, giving them their instructions. But ironically, the qualities that make these works so difficult to locate within LeWitt's broader practice are also what makes them so intriguing for curators and scholars today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna and Veronica, for great talks, and to David for the invitation, and to everybody at 192 Books, Paula Cooper, and Yale University Press that made this possible. It's a great honor to be here. Today I'm going to talk about a really central part of my contribution to Locating Sol LeWitt, which is a series of photographs that LeWitt took between 1976 and 1980, the last several years that he lived on the Lower East Side. As you can see from the title of my paper, I do address some other bodies of work beyond this photograph, these photographs to kind of expand on LeWitt's relationship to Manhattan during this period. But for today, I'd like to focus on this sort of more limited and also, I think, very quirky series of photographs. David, next slide, if you would. So these photographs were published. This was an ongoing series, as I mentioned, shot between the years approximately of 1976 and 1980. And these photographs were published by LeWitt in a series, several different publications, the first of which was Tom Marioni's journal Vision, published in 1976, that ran a 6-page spread of these arrays of 8 photographs on each page. So this is the earliest iteration of his photographs that he takes on the walls of Lower Manhattan, as he calls it in this context, on the walls of Lower Manhattan. LeWitt lived on Hester Street. He lived in the Lower East Side, and these walls were walls that he saw daily. He was a great walker, an explorer of neighborhoods, and of course, he'd been making his wall drawings since 1968 when he executed his first wall drawing at Paula Cooper. So there is automatically, I think, a dialogue between this fascination with photographing the walls of his neighborhood and his own practice as an artist, particularly well known at this point for his wall drawings. Now, these arrays of photographs depicted a range of different subjects. Frequently, we see community-based murals, typically that were commissioned by the City Arts Organization, specifically to reflect the ethnic and cultural diversity of the Lower East Side. One that I've identified here, this Statue of Liberty, is part of a mural by the artist Tome Arai called Women Hold Up Half the Sky. And I think it's very significant that he's documenting these murals painted by a range of artists, known and unknown, as well as graffiti, other markings, posters, signage, as a way of thinking about the walls of the neighborhood, as he put it, as sort of the newspaper of the people. This is his word, his phrase. So the typical arrays will include a juxtaposition of images, graffiti, signage, mark making, sometimes simple numbers, and typically also a political poster, sometimes more than one, sometimes many. The posters that you see here, I realize that we can't read it because we're sort of that looks quite small on your screen, but this was a poster, for instance, on the occasion of the bicentennial that reads, "We've carried the rich for 200 years, let's get them off our backs." And these were posters created by a 4th of July coalition of workers groups, veterans groups, and student groups demanding jobs and demanding the rebuilding of cities that had been abandoned by developers and the government during the recession of the 1970s. So frequently demands for social justice are depicted in these photographs. Next slide, please. The next iteration of photographs of walls of the Lower East Side was published in Art Forum in 1979. And we can see that there's a little more information here. He writes, photographs taken within the last 2 years in a 10-block radius, signs, posters, and graffiti. So he gives himself rules, limits that typically define his conceptual practice. You can also see this juxtaposition of a wheat paste poster of a political prisoner, as well as simple, hopscotch or, some sort of children's game, and other various signage from the neighborhood, as well as a community-based mural. Next slide, please. In 1980, he publishes an array of photographs of the Lower East Side in the Italian leftist journal Mela. And for this iteration, he chooses primarily political posters that would have, I think, aligned with more kind of global leftist actions during this period. For instance, there is a poster that targets the Indian Prime Minister who's visiting the United States, calling him a pet dog of imperialism. There's a poster that supports an anti-Ku Klux Klan group working in Mississippi. So there's a lot of sort of indication of both national and global exchange within these leftist political movements that we can see in this selection of images that he's chosen to publish in Europe. Next slide, please, David. Finally, LeWitt actually intended a full-fledged book of these photographs of the Lower East Side. And he created paste ups of 74 pages, each containing a 9-photograph grid. These were displayed at the John Weber Gallery in 1980. And by all accounts, he fully intended for these to become a book. But for some reason, it's not entirely clear, the book was never produced. So this is another example of what Daisy mentioned at the beginning of these sorts of productive abandonments, perhaps. And we can see in these arrays, this kind of juxtaposition of security gates, of numbers, of addresses, of community-based arts organizations, of the Bozo Clown Ensemble. A soup kitchen is depicted here in the center. So this kind of sort of, I think, very purposeful juxtaposition of urgent social and economic needs, as well as the kinds of banalities of addresses of community-based art groups. There's an ad for rice or diapers in other iterations of these. Next, please, David. Here's another page. These are, in fact, the last 2 pages from the Paste Up series that was intended to become a book. That was not a book. And you can see, again, these kinds of different sort of references to the incredible ethnic diversity of the neighborhood. The Jewish population, the Puerto Rican population frequently recur in references. The Chinese population within these juxtapositions. There's also a poster here on the upper right that is demanding justice for the communist workers who were killed in a march in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1979 in an anti-Klan march. So there are some very urgent and really critical sorts of calls for justice that are incorporated regularly within these grids. So This kind of array of very different sorts of images, very different sorts of content, I think was very significant. And I think that it really gives a clear sense of LeWitt's politics, at least his alliances, or his allyship as a member of this community in the Lower East Side. At the same time, of course, they're presented in this kind of dispassionate grid format. They seem indexical. There's a sort of pointing without commentary. There's no text to go along with these images. Now, again, LeWitt has written in his own notes, not in a publication, that he understood community walls as newspapers of the people, belonging to what he called a, quote, multi-class general public. So this sense of a kind of community rallying and kinship with regard to culture and causes. This multi-class general public, as he put it, was really, of course, distinct from the kinds of visitors who would see LeWitt's own work, visitors to museums or galleries, where he was drawing on walls, whether Paula Cooper or by 1978 or by the 1970s, the Museum of Modern Art. He characterized museums and galleries as ideal aesthetic situations, isolated spaces. In my essay, I think a lot about the relationship, about the viewership of his work in relationship to these walls of the Lower East Side, the ways in which audiences define a work of art. As Hans Hacke has written, the term artist and the term work of art derive their currency from the relative ideological frame of a given cultural power group. LeWitt's neighborhood walls were notably not pasted with announcements for his shows at John Weber, Paula Cooper, or MoMA, but rather with posters for community groups and so forth, declaring an ethos in one poster, build culture to serve the people, again, in the context of economic precarity and urgent political realities. The artist Tom Marioni, again, also called these the wall drawings of LeWitt's neighborhood. So naturally, Lucy Lepard, interviewing Sol LeWitt for his 1978 retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, asked him, why don't you make a drawing on one of these walls? You're so fascinated with these walls. It seems like a great opportunity. LeWitt was blunt in his response. Lepard reports that he refused to consider the possibility of making public art of his own on the walls of the Lower East Side. The reason he gave was that he believed that the imposition of his own choice upon this public would be a patronizing and colonialist gesture. And I find that very, very significant that LeWitt, as early as 1977, is really declaring that the role, by asserting the kind of museum or gallery art that he's producing on these community walls, would be a kind of colonialist gesture. The photographs of the Lower East Side denote the complex relationship of the artist to his community. Rather than participating in forming the wall's texts, LeWitt records them as ethnographer or a documentarian. Indeed, few of the walls reflect LeWitt's own demographic as a gallery artist. LeWitt is both privileged and marginal, part of and peripheral to the social functioning of his neighborhood. By 1980, his presence as an artist may have also been associated with the threat of gentrification as galleries began to move into the Lower East Side, as well as many artists. Indeed, LeWitt's partial views of Lower Manhattan walls augur gentrification and the loss of economic and cultural diversity in the Lower East Side over the next decades. Next slide. As LeWitt photographed these walls, he was honored with a mid-career retrospective at MoMA in 1978. 1978 was also the year that Carol Duncan and Alan Wallach wrote their iconic critique, The Museum of Modern Art as Late Capitalist Ritual, which I highly recommend that you read if you're unfamiliar with that essay, The Museum of Modern Art as Late Capitalist Ritual. They describe MoMA's facade as, quote, an impersonal and silent wall of glass that has no message for the public world. Inside the museum was an ideal world of spirit, they write, a refuge from the struggle for existence that pervades everyday life outside. I understand the Lower East Side project as a reflection on the White Cube and community as distinct cultural and ideological fields at the moment of this important career milestone, the MoMA retrospective. Exhibiting these photographs at the Weber Gallery, as he did, or publishing them on the pages of Artforum, enacted the privileged authorship of the avant-garde artist to circulate and make visible what Lepard called an encyclopedia of art of our time and place. LeWitt ultimately did not publish the book he'd set out to make with those 74 pay stubs. These photographs summon complex issues of agency, rights to the city, and appropriation of community's cultural expression. In my reading, LeWitt's decision not to publish a book of these photographs was a note of ambivalence. The stakes were high, and the walls belonged to others. Last photo, please. Last image, please, David. LeWitt's dialogue with Hans Haacke helps put the Lower East Side photographs in context. The artist traded several works in 1976, including wall drawings for Haacke's Saul Goodman and Alex DiLorenzo, Manhattan Real Estate Holdings, a real-time social system, a companion work to the better-known Sapolsky et al. This work documents the vast holdings of real estate magnates, Goldman and Lorenzo, whose portfolio included rundown tenements below 14th Street. It was also well known that the Chase Manhattan Bank was the principal lender to the Goldman DiLorenzo real estate empire, among many others. David Rockefeller was Chase Manhattan Bank's chief executive officer and an influential board member at MoMA. So Hans Haacke creates this. I'll just wrap up quickly, so I feel as if I'm running over time a little bit. And all this information is, of course, in the book, but this collage is a kind of a joke, as Haacke puts it, created for LeWitt that depicts some elements of Haacke's work on the top, this photograph of Rockefeller, the Chase advantage, some text extolling the importance of the perception of trustworthiness of Chase Manhattan Bank for the sake of marketing, as well as its art collection. Giving this to LeWitt at the moment of his MoMA retrospective that also is coinciding with his photographs of the Lower East Side, I think suggests a very kind of complicated entanglement of this joke visualizes the entanglement of MoMA's patronage and the corporate image of Chase Manhattan Bank as it profited off real estate speculation and displacement on the Lower East Side. To me, the Lower East Side photographs are an incredibly ambivalent series that bring these tensions into focus, set in dialogue with LeWitt's so-called museum art or gallery art, his self-awareness, and we might even say his forthright politics within this series was a revelation to me, along with the timely questions it raises about privilege, audience, and the rights to the city. Thank you.
So thank you, Kirsten and Veronica and Anna for those great talks. And I'll wrap up our event by talking about one of the two essays that I contributed to the volume, the one on printmaking. Since printmaking is so close to my heart, I've elected to talk about this one. So the title is LeWitt Moves, Choreographing the Printed Image. In this essay, I investigate several prints that were made in the early 1970s and in the 1990s. These works of lithography, etching, and silkscreen feature lines, scribbles, and brushstrokes, and most are produced from one or two plates or screens that were systematically rotated and combined in layers during the production process, resulting in a single image or a series. And here we're looking at the 15th print in the etching series, Bands of Color in Four Directions and All Combinations from 1971. I'm especially interested in the repertoire of moves that generated these images and in the notion that LeWitt's art initiates actual movement that activates pictorial space along with the perceptual space of viewers. His practice has often been compared to that of a composer. In fact, he was very fond of that analogy. But in this essay, I suggest that a comparison to a choreographer is more fitting in the case of these particular prints. In 1970, when LeWitt took up printmaking after 15 years devoted mainly to painting and sculpture, he quickly homed in on the medium's inherent technical and mechanical properties that best served his form of conceptual art, especially his desire to relinquish authorial control in the form of intuitive decision-making or actual hands-on production. In a 1974 interview, he said of printmaking, "I use the medium as a fabricator. I do a minimum amount of work and give it to the printer to complete." And this is a great example of this approach. To make this etching series, which LeWitt created during his first residency at Crown Point Press, only 2 copper plates were used, one with a band of parallel lines across the middle, and the other with a band of parallel lines from corner to corner. With a quarter turn, the first plate could print both the horizontal and the vertical bands, while the second plate could print the diagonal band from left to right and the diagonal band from right to left. Assigned black, yellow, red, and blue, respectively, these 4 orientations, the title's 4 directions, were maintained throughout the series in all 2, 3, and 4-part combinations, culminating with the layering of all the color bands in the 15th print, which I'm showing you. There's a 16th print as well, but there he assigns the bands different colors. LeWitt may have initially been attracted to the idea of turning the print matrix as an efficient shortcut that saved time and labor, but it is clear that he quickly realized that it allowed him to extend and refine aspects of his systematic serial practice, providing a new level of uniformity and control, which was unavailable in other mediums. Thus, the rotation of the matrix becomes a system for LeWitt, one that he wanted viewers to recognize. He usually signaled the use of rotation in his titles. Here, lines not long, not heavy, not touching, drawn at random, circle, in 4 colors, printed in 4 directions. This lithograph relies on only 1 pen and ink drawing that was transferred to 4 plates. Each plate was printed in a different color, yellow, red, blue, and black. And with each color, the drawing rotates a quarter turn, thus spinning the lines into a chaotic swirl. When seen in person, the procedure is easy to discern. The title's clues are helpful, 4 colors and printed in 4 directions. Along the circle's periphery, you can easily see several identical straggly lines repeated in each color at quarter intervals. In this case, uniformity and control make way for chance and accident through the use of rotation. The drawings not touching lines are now thoroughly touching and tangled, and the viewer's perceptual experience is foregrounded. Now, as I thought about these prints over a couple years, at least, I didn't completely understand what LeWitt was up to until I attended a 2016 revival of Dance, the 1979 collaboration between LeWitt and the choreographer Lucinda Childs and the composer Philip Glass. For his contribution, LeWitt worked with filmmaker Lisa Rinsler to create a 35mm black and white film that was projected on a scrim, a transparent curtain at the edge of the stage. This allows the layering of the live dance behind with its filmed counterpart projected from the front. As Deborah Perlberg noted in Art Forum, the combination of live and filmed dance results in a complex, active form of viewing. Instead of duplicating the live performance, LeWitt's film radically alters the experience through overlapping, fragmentation, freeze frames, and shifting scale and viewpoint. Ultimately, the film promotes a way of seeing, of paying attention, of visually understanding. It permits viewers to see the dance from multiple angles, from the front, but also from above, from the sides, from the corners, and even from the rear of the stage, sometimes combining views through superimposition or split screen. In short, LeWitt constantly rotates and layers the dance and the stage. My essay culminates with my analysis of this print, a 1994 silkscreen titled Brushstrokes in All Directions. This was printed at the studio of Joe Watanabe, who was responsible in some way or other for over half of LeWitt's print editions. Although relatively small in scale, it's just 16 by 16 inches, the image area. This is the most spectacular example of LeWitt's use of rotation. It began with an ink drawing on an acetate sheet composed of mostly straight, short brushstrokes in all directions. And using a light-sensitive emulsion, the drawing was transferred to 2 screens. For the first, it was oriented as it was drawn, and in the second, the image was reversed or flipped. Each screen was printed in yellow, red, blue, and gray for a total of 8 layers. For the yellow and gray layers, the relationship between the 2 screens represents a reversal of the original drawing from side to side and top to bottom, respectively, resulting in a mirror relationship. For the printing of the red and blue, the procedure involved rotating the 2 screens a quarter turn in relation to each other, which heightens a specifically diagonal rhyming of colors and brushstrokes across the print. The use of reversal, along with the drawing's complete rotation, clockwise and counterclockwise, is most explicitly revealed by the print's overall symmetry, which is most apparent in the star-like form in the print's center. As he demonstrated in his film for dance, LeWitt is encouraging an active and peripatetic kind of viewing. As I write in the essay, the print is a kinetic puzzle and a multi-layered kaleidoscopic performance. And to fully comprehend it, one must see the print's marks not only in total, but also from multiple viewpoints, and close up from each side and even from behind. The viewer is prompted to reconstruct the process of the print's creation, the series of moves, the reversal and the turning of the drawing through a visual and mental re-performance. Thus, the payoff for the viewer is the discovery of a beautiful structure in the midst of what at first appears to be only a chaotic thicket of brushstrokes. All right, so I'll end there and stop sharing my screen. And unfortunately, we've come to the end of the hour. So we need to pass it on to Daisy, but I'd like to thank all of our participants and to thank Paula Cooper Gallery and 192 Books as well. Of course, you can find all of us on the internet. Our emails are readily available. So please send us your questions. We'd be happy to answer any of them. And please look at Locating Sol LeWitt, available now at your local bookstore. All right, Daisy.
Thank you so much for that fantastic introduction to your chapters. I encourage everyone to go ahead and read more in the book. I think I speak for all Sol LeWitt fans, whether they know it or not, when I say that we're very lucky to have this amazing compendium of scholarship, and it's very compact, so could possibly even be considered for some holiday reading. A recording of this event will be posted on this webpage immediately afterwards if you missed the beginning or would like to share it with a friend. And all of our previous events are also available to watch on paulacoopergallerystudio.com. If you'd like to reserve a copy of the book for pickup at 192 Books, you can send an email to info@192books.com, or you can visit the shop for safe, socially distanced browsing every day from 11 to 6 and until 7 on Fridays and Saturdays. You can also order the book from the 192bookshop.org page for direct shipment, and there's a link to that below on this page. Our next event will be between Lucy Bradnock and Stuart Comer, where they'll discuss Lucy's new book, No More Masterpieces, Modern Art After Artaud. And that will be on Thursday, June 10th at 6 p.m. here on PCG Studio. And I actually happen to have that one on my desk too. So I'm going to show that one to you as well. And you can sign up to our newsletter or check our website or the 192 Books website for more information about our future events. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us, and have a lovely evening.